Man, shut up, you asshole tree. Yeah, I know he's from the desert, but you don't gotta call him a desert man. It feels gross, you know what I mean? While I was working on my last video about what being a gamer in the Middle East was like, there was a giant neon elephant in the room that I wasn't sure I wanted to acknowledge. Ultimately, I decided to not clutter that video up with this topic and kept it focused on being a nostalgia trip / novelty video. But, as someone who was actually somewhat qualified to speak on this subject, I feel like it would be wrong of me to not at least wave at that neon elephant. Yes, as you could already tell from the title of the video, I wanted to speak a bit on what Arab and Muslim representation in gaming looks like. In my research, I was both surprised and not surprised at how little coverage this topic has actually gotten over the years. There's been a ton of content produced regarding black representation, LGBTQ representation, Latino representation, etc, etc, yet we, as Arabs and Muslims, seem to have flown under the radar a bit, despite how insanely obvious the problem is. I don't think I'm gonna be blowing any minds with this video, but it's important to start having this conversation and laying things out as clearly as possible. And mind you, I'm not here to just complain, although there will certainly be a lot of that. I have some solutions in mind, but we have to actually look at the issue before we talk about how to fix it. Oh, and for the people who are inevitably gonna take this video to the shittier parts of Reddit and Twitter and jerk each other silly about how the snowflake SJWs are getting triggered about representation again, I politely ask you to fuck off. I have points I want to make, and if someone making critical observations about the medium is enough to make you clutch your waifu body pillows in indignation, perhaps I'm not the one with the problem, khayyi. Anyway, to set the stage just a bit, I want to bring up a study someone did of Arabs in films because I think there's a lot of similarities to be found there. I don't want this video to be too steeped in academic language, so to condense things down, in 2001, Dr. Jack Shaheen published a study examining 1,000 different films where Arabs made an appearance. Essentially, he had a system where he rated these films as either having a positive, neutral, or negative depiction of Arabs and Muslims. Wanna guess how many he judged as having a positive depiction? 12. Not 12%, just 12. 52 had a neutral depiction, which means that 936 had negative portrayals. And this was before 9/11. Yes, really. I don't want to get too in the weeds about this study, but there's a documentary made about it that I highly recommend you check out if you want the full breakdown. I really wish someone would make a similar study about Arabs and Muslims in video games because I couldn't find any contemporary analysis like that. Hell, if I had the funding and resources to sit down on my ass and play 1,000 games, I would make such a study myself, but, you know, money doesn't grow on trees. But anyway, for the purposes of this video, I want to pull his observations about the patterns found in these negative stereotypes because, surprise, surprise, they pop up in video games all the damn time as well. The first major one, and the one I'm sure you immediately envisioned the second you read the video's title, is the terrorist stereotype, the dudes blowing shit up stereotype. I can't imagine I have to elaborate much on this one. Even if you're the most alt-right ass, 4chan ass, racism isn't real ass son of a bitch to have ever walked the earth, you have to concede that video games have a massive tendency to slot Arabs into the evil terrorist role. You just have to. Dr. Shaheen made this observation before 9/11, so what do you think Arabs in media looked like afterward? The contemporary war shooter is the home for this kind of stereotype. Despite how much we loved Call of Duty's multiplayer in the Middle East, the campaign deployed you into fictional Arab country registered trademark and asked you to shoot nondescript Muslims in the face, with the infamous Khalid al-Assad leaving quite the impression on people. Modern Warfare 2 also had you shooting up a bunch of insurgents in Afghanistan. Then there was Battlefield 2, which also took place in fictional Arab country registered trademark, and Battlefield 3, which had you fighting actual Iranian people in Iraq. You can look at Medal of Honor, Splinter Cell, Rainbow Six, on and on we can go. Like I said, I feel for anyone that has looked at the back of a AAA shooter's box in the past 13-ish years, this stereotype is pretty damn obvious. Most Arabs and Muslims in these games are either gibbering extremists who want to take your freedoms away, or a weirdly charismatic extremist who also wants to take your freedoms away. Look, I didn't make this video to tell you that shooting violent fuckheads is a bad thing, but when this is basically the face representing more than a billion people, maybe it's time to step back and wonder what message you're sending to the world. Speaking of the message, there was actually a study done by a professor at my alma mater, the University of Michigan. I'll link the whole thing in the description, but basically she found that people who play games depicting Arabs and Muslims in this way are more likely to associate them with the terrorist stereotype. Yeah, I know, a real mind-bending conclusion, but it's nice to have someone taking a more scientific approach. She also found that even when the terrorists in the game weren't Arab or Muslim, we still got associated with terrorism, suggesting that the connection between Muslim and terrorist is so strong in pop culture that the mere suggestion of one group immediately conjures images of the other. That's when you know things have gotten out of hand. I haven't blown up shit, and yet I still get associated with people who have. My only offense is constantly being overdue with returning library books. I don't really think I should get saddled with the blame of conspiring to destroy the Western world, assholes. And one more thing before I move on. Something that I find really weird is that even though Muslim terrorists are often the grunts in these shooter games, we rarely ever have the clout to be the main villains. Often the ones pulling the strings are Russians, who also have had a rotten deal. Basically, we're simultaneously horrible terrorists and too dumb to even be the masterminds of the plot. Talk about adding insult to injury. Anyway, terrorism is not the only negative stereotype Dr. Shaheen found in his study. There are a couple of others that cropped up even when the characters were quote-unquote good guys. A major one, and one I also see fairly often in video games, is the Bedouin stereotype, which I would personally extend to just generally being removed from modern society. You might find it strange that this is considered a negative trait. I mean, when you think of the very few Arab and Muslim heroes in gaming, you might think of Altair, or the Prince of Persia, or some of the Gerudo in Zelda, or that one dude in Uncharted 3, Sheikh Salim. But see, here's the thing. I feel that the very vast majority of the time when there is a good Arab or Muslim, they always tend to either be from medieval times or to be as far removed from contemporary society as possible. As if the last time we were worth a damn was around the time the fucking Astrolab was invented. Like, I kinda just want to take what I can get, but this is a baffling phenomenon that has two different implications. One, this pattern of representation means that a lot of people think that we still live like that to this day, hence my story in my last video about how I would be asked if we even had televisions in the Middle East, a question asked without any malicious intent, but was clearly being influenced by the image the person had of where I came from. And two, it suggests that modern-day Arabs cannot possibly be sympathetic figures and are mostly committed to the taking away your freedoms agenda discussed earlier. Look, I don't begrudge developers for making games like The Prince of Persia. Hell, The Sands of Time is one of my favorite games ever, period. But positive representation can't just be from an era or place where people treated camels like Ferraris. Well, to be fair, we don't just have heroes from a time before toilet paper was invented. Dr. Shaheen also noted that there existed the opposite side of the coin. He described the stereotype as being naive, carefree, and hedonistic, someone who pursued their own pleasure. This stereotype also makes up the few other Arabs and Muslims I've seen in gaming. Think of Yusuf from GTA 4. Yeah, he's one of the protagonists, I guess, and he's at least as good as you can be in GTA. He's certainly a fun presence on screen, no doubt about that, but he's the embodiment of this stereotype. Dude has a golden Uzi and lives life as a reckless orgy of sex, drugs, and spending, according to his dad. Basically, what I'm talking about is an oil baron or real estate mogul who has infinite money and usually comes from Dubai, or fictional Dubai, as might be the case. And on a similar vein, if you catch the rare sight of an Arab or Muslim woman in a game, as the terrorists tend to be men, they're probably dressed like this. There's a handful of exceptions like in Deus Ex or Just Cause, but this is usually your lot. Gaming already has a problem with sexualizing women, and this sure as shit isn't helping. Dr. Shaheen had some other points to make, but the ones I mentioned are the ones that I've had the most exposure to while playing games. We're either stuck being represented as terrorists, uncivilized ancient relics, or crazy rich dudes with a fleet of Bugattis, or belly dancers. In the name of fairness, there are a handful of positive examples you can cite. A lot of fighting games tend to have the designated Arab character, and while they're usually drenched in stereotype, it's no worse than most of the other characters, for better or worse. Uncharted 3 is probably one of the better AAA games in recent memory when it comes to Arabs. Yes, you're saved by a group of Bedouins, because of course you fucking are. That's one of the very few games I've seen that depict modern Arab cities that aren't smoking craters in the ground. We get a glimpse of Syria and Yemen, and while your time in the latter is mostly confined to a bazaar, you can at least argue that those still exist in plenty of cities, so I can't get up its ass too much. Still, while I'm sure people will yell some counterexamples at me as if it invalidated everything I said, whatever you scrounge up can only possibly be a pittance, a drop in the bucket. And like the study I mentioned earlier, this imagery does have an effect on how people think of us, which is why it's important to point these things out and push for something better. Which leads me to the solutions I mentioned at the top of the video. The easy solution is obviously to talk about the problems and draw attention to them, like what this video is aiming to do. We need to acknowledge the issue and discuss the hows, whys, and whos, so we can start figuring out what we actually want to see in the media we consume. Personally, I just want to see the kind of person you might find on the streets of Beirut or Amman, someone who lives in a modern Arab city who isn't absolutely loaded with cash. I'm sure there's examples, but I certainly can't think of many. Let me know, actually. I ask sincerely. But this dialogue is only the start. Truth is, I don't really think running up to white people and begging them to start treating us better in their games is gonna work. Not by itself. If we want to see ourselves treated better in Western media, we have to acknowledge that we have a responsibility to start getting into these industries and changing them from the inside, creating our own works of art. I got a degree in journalism and film because I wanted to do that very thing, but you know, that's gonna take a bit of time. I'm doing what I can with my skill set to raise awareness, but it certainly doesn't stop here. There are Arab game studios, of course, though the ones I find seem to only really put out mobile and licensed games. There are a couple of high-profile Arab game directors working for bigger companies, like Ashraf Ismail, the director of Assassin's Creed 4 and Origins, though he seems to have been accused of sexual harassment, so maybe he's a bad example. There's Joseph Fares, the creator of Brothers and A Way Out, and also the greatest man alive today.
Can you swear here?
Can you swear?
Okay. Fuck the Oscars, you know? Fuck the Oscars! Fuck you! I'll tell you! This is insane. If the whole world tell me your game is shit, I'll tell them, no, it's not.
Right.
That's how much I believe in it.
Okay.
All right?
Those are words to live by. And I mean that without a trace of irony. Listen to that shit, man. Anyway, I don't want you guys taking the wrong ideas away from this video. If you're white, the point of this isn't to shame you, because white guilt has never really done anything for anyone, if it only manifests as people stuttering apologies on Twitter for shit that they didn't do. If you're Arab and or Muslim, I don't want you thinking you need to feel bad for liking any of the games I mentioned. I played the shit out of some of these games myself. And if you're a member of some other minority group in America or Europe, I hope that you find some parallels between your experiences in media and ours, and perhaps come with us to help improve things. I think it's important to be conscious of the media you consume, to participate in dialogues about what's going on and how we can do better, and most importantly, if you think you have the technical or creative skills, I encourage you to get into the gaming industry and starting to influence things from the inside. I really think that's how things actually start to change. That's it from me on this topic. Before I go, I do want to acknowledge that a lot of my recent subscribers are Arabs, if the comments section of the last video is any evidence. I really do appreciate you guys' support. and I hope you enjoy seeing an Arab's perspective on gaming. I will say that not every video I make will strictly deal with Arab issues like this video or the last, but rest assured that whatever I make, you'll be getting that pinch of spice, of Arab spice, that few other channels are providing. But until next time, Mas salama.